Intense fighting is continuing in Gaza just hours after the passing of the first UN Security Council resolution calling for an immediate ceasefire. Witnesses say Israeli warplanes have again bombed the southern city of Rafah, with gun battles raging in other areas. This is the moment the vote was passed after previous attempts to call for a ceasefire failed. The US is now calling for an immediate surge in desperately needed aid. These are the latest pictures in the past hour of aid being airdropped into Gaza. The UN World Food Programme says famine could set in by May in 2 areas of Gaza unless the flow of aid is increased. Israel's Prime Minister has responded to the UN vote by cancelling some meetings between Israeli and American officials. Meanwhile, Hamas appears to have rejected the latest truce proposal made via mediators in Qatar. Well, let's go live to Jerusalem and our Middle East correspondent, Yolande Nell. Yolande, what more do we know about the state of fighting in Gaza overnight, just after this UN resolution was passed?
I mean, it seems that the resolution passing has had very little impact on the ground. What we've heard from Palestinian witnesses that even in Rafah on the Egypt border, there have been Israeli airstrikes in that area, and that fighting remains intense, particularly around the 2 hospitals that we've been talking about for the past few days. The Shifa hospital in Gaza City, that's where Israeli forces launched a raid 1 week ago, where they say they've rounded up 500 members of Hamas and Islamic Jihad. Palestinian residents nearby saying they've seen corpses on the street, that there is still close quarters battles going on there. Also in Al Amal Hospital, around Al Amal Hospital, in the southern city of Khan Yunis, Israeli tanks rolling back in there in the past couple of days, and the Israeli military has said that Hamas is using civilian infrastructure in that area.
And Yolande, what's the feeling there in the region about what kind of a difference this resolution could bring to the fighting there in Gaza?
Well, of course, while Israel reacted very angrily to this, and it said that this could be an encouragement for Hamas, that it didn't have to give up the Israeli hostages that it's still holding in exchange for a ceasefire. And we had strong rebukes from the Israeli Prime Minister when it comes to the American position, the abstention when it came to voting on Security Council Resolution 2728. The claim was made that really that this marked a divergence from Washington's previous policy. The US has denied that, but on the Palestinian side, this was welcomed, including by Hamas. But as we can see, it's not, despite the fact UN Security Council resolutions are seen as having the force of international law. We also had a White House official, when he was talking about the Israeli reaction, saying that he didn't think really that this would have an impact on Israel's ability to tackle Hamas, and that it didn't change things when it comes to the US commitment to Israel, particularly when it comes to matters like military assistance.
So seeing the strong support for this resolution at the UN Security Council, how isolated is Israel on the global stage, would you say?
This is something that will concern Israel greatly. It does feel very much like it's isolated, but at the same time, if you look at surveys of the Israeli public opinion, there is still wide support for the war in Gaza and for this idea of dismantling Hamas there. It's seen as being such an existential threat. We've had reminders that Hamas can still pose a threat. In the past day, we've had rockets fired to Ashdod, an Israeli city in the south of the country. For the first time in weeks, there were rocket warning sirens that continued to go off through last night in Israeli communities close to the Gaza Strip. But yes, on an international stage, Israel will be worried about this. And we've had Israeli officials coming out in the past day or so, particularly talking about how they are trying to get a surge of aid using that UN language, trying to flood Gaza with aid, we were told in a briefing yesterday, as that is part of this resolution too. And of course, part of the big international demand that they're so worried about the threat of starvation and famine in Gaza.
Yolande, thank you very much. That's the BBC's Yolande Nell there in Jerusalem. Now, as well as calling for a ceasefire, the UN is also warning that northern areas of Gaza could face famine within weeks. Israel says it's opening new routes to let aid through. And the Israeli army chief in charge of aid coordination says there's no shortage of food. I should warn you that this report from our Middle East correspondent Lucy Williamson contains some distressing images from the very start.
Gaza's border fence divides more than just land. On one side, food supplies. On the other, sick, malnourished children. Agencies say Israel is blocking aid. Israel says the only hold-up is the agency's ability to deliver it. A ceasefire could help get aid in, but Israel has said it won't work with the UN's main relief agency, UNRWA, accusing it of links to Hamas. UNRWA's chief said the ban was outrageous. Gate 96, a newly opened crossing point, takes trucks straight to Gaza City, where the UN says people are weeks away from famine. On the night we were there, the army said 20 trucks were approved to cross, but only 7 showed up.
We took a lot of measures in order to enlarge the amount of humanitarian aid, but the UN and other international organizations have some bottlenecks. They have issues and challenges regarding logistics of amount of trucks, amount of truck drivers, manpower, working hours, and etc.
On board one of those trucks, the local head of the World Food Programme, with a different explanation.
On this particular convoy, we were given a limit of 15 vetted drivers by the IDF that were cleared to use this route, but only 7 were available to us. Some had already gone up to Gaza City the day before, and they simply hadn't been able to return yet. We literally need 50, 60, 70, 80 truck drivers cleared to use these routes every single day.
Israel is keen to show the world it's allowing more aid into Gaza, but it says it's not responsible for the amount of aid going in. International law says different. It says Israel has a duty not just to open the gates, but to get food and medicine to the people under its control. Do you think children are starving in Gaza?
I know that they are not.
So when you see those pictures of children starving in hospital, what do you think?
I said, and I will say it again, as much as I know, there is no starvation in Gaza.
2 things are crossing this border: aid and the army. They bring food and war, life and death. Lucy Williamson, BBC News, on the Gaza border.
The UK's Royal Air Force has airdropped more than 10 tons of food into Gaza for the first time, including water, rice and baby formula. The airdrop comes amid fears that 1.1 million Gazans face imminent famine in a catastrophic humanitarian crisis. The Defence Secretary Grant Shapps urged Israel to allow more aid into the war-torn territory.